Good evening, everyone.
Hi-ho, Dahlia. So Kelly, if you can do the share screen thing, I'm gonna see if I can figure out how to do that. I haven't done it for a few months, so that's not what I want to do. Okay. Start recording. Pause recording. We can get that.
Hey, you did a good job on, what was it, Friday with that meeting down
I think that was Thursday. It's been a long
Thursday?
time.
Yeah. Anyway, you stood up for CPC and explained it very well. The only thing is, I couldn't understand a word anyone said. You and the senator, we could understand both of you, but no one else. It was just it's terrible. The sound in there was terrible.
Well, that might have been a positive thing.
That could well be.
So I'm looking for my share screen function here, and I'm not finding it. Kelly, can you tell me where it is?
I've made you the host of the meeting, so you should have share screen now.
Okay, I'm just looking for it. Okay.
Should be in green at the bottom of the page.
There it is. Thank you. Okay, so now I just have to figure out what it is I want to share. I want to find pictures. And down at the bottom of pictures, which I can't get to because of the bar on the bottom of the screen. So let me see if I can reduce that and move it up. There we go. Ta-da. Should come up. There we are. Yay. Isn't that pretty? That's a table card with an easel that I put an easel backing on it. But Mike Krachowski produced 6 of these, one for each CPC, along with our, what do you call it? It's our ID cards. And
I'm not sure I see it the way you probably think we do. I see something small in the corner, but I don't see it very large.
I'm sorry, what was that, Paul?
I'm not really seeing, I don't think what you're showing or what you think you're showing. I just see a list of items in your folder.
All right, well, I don't know. Just a minute, let me see what I can do about that. What do I have to do? What I want to do is click on that. And then maybe if I smaller that and close this, and then I can, oh, the shared window is closed now. I don't know how to get it to stay. I'll hold it up next to the screen.
Oh, nice.
Okay, good.
Okay, and Mike made 6 of those, one for each of the CPCs. And I think it's a great effort. He did it at his own expense and on his own hook. And these are the ID cards that we're having, oops, that's not gonna work, having available. And these are not city authorized ID cards. They're simply something that the Council of Chairs thought would be useful at CPC events. That if we're doing like a road show or when we go back to in-person forums, we'll be able to have ID cards. We've got a couple people that I don't have pictures of yet, but you know who you are. And the others, I have to get around and drop them off. So anyway, so that's where that is. So it's after 6 now. So I'm assuming that everybody's got their snowshoes taken off and their parkas brushed off and hung away. So let's call this shindig to order and start with the roll call of our CPC panel members and the establishment of the quorum. So Andre.
Hello, this is Andre Nguyen, joined by phone.
Okay, Andre, good to see your A, even though your face isn't visible. David, I see you there.
Present.
Yep. And Graham, I see you.
Good evening.
Evening, Idalia. So nice to see you.
Hi, everyone.
Are you back from your?
I'm back from Mexico. Yeah, I'm in Albuquerque, down the street from you.
Well, so glad you were able to make that important trip.
Thank you.
Josephine, I see you. Yep, nice wave. Judy Young.
I'm here. Good to see you.
Good to be seen. Paul Robert.
Hello.
Thank you, Paul Cedillo.
Thank you.
Samuel, he was here a minute ago. Maybe he was abducted by aliens or something. I don't know what happened to him, but he was here. I'll put a question mark. And Catherine, I guess, is not here yet.
She's in the other area, either yourself or Kelly. But if you're the host, we need to bring her in because she's
Yes.
here. She's not in the panelist.
You can make me the host again, or you can click on her name and add her as a panelist.
Okay, I have to find.
Click on my name and it says make host or something like that. And
Okay.
do it. Under participants, look up my name and click it.
Just a minute. Okay. I got you. I clicked on you. Nothing happened.
And it should say assign host duties or something like that.
Make host.
Okay.
Do I want to change the host to Kelly? Well,
Yeah.
Okay. So apparently what you're saying is that Catherine didn't get the panelist code. There she is. Hi, Catherine. And then she's got her hand up. Big yellow hand. Hi, Catherine.
Hi, can you guys hear me?
Absolutely, we got you.
Okay.
Good to know you're with us. Okay, so first of all, the approval of the agenda. Our agenda for tonight, November 8th, 2021, was posted the first of the month. And if there's any disagreement, please voice that disagreement. Otherwise, I'm going to believe to my heart that everybody agrees with the agenda. Hearing no disagreement, the agenda is approved. Approval of the minutes of the October forum, which were posted on the website. Any disagreement, please note. There's no disagreement, so the minutes are deemed approved. New and unfinished business. Unfortunately, this afternoon at Vance Cabela resigned from our Community Policing Council. He is feeling pressure related to other activities of his that he also deems very important. And he feels that it's better if he not continue to participate in the CPC. So he has resigned effective immediately. We wish him all the best, and we have appreciated his contributions and his presence at our executive chats and at our other events and these meetings. So best wishes to Vance. First aid training. I put that on the list. We have nothing that I would hope that we are going to approve, but the subject came up of whether all of the 6 CPCs should ask the city to arrange a first aid training class available to CPC panel members. And that's great, but we haven't asked the city to do that yet. Only reason I wanted to mention it now is for those of you who were or have a first aid certification card and you haven't been to a session in the last 2 years because of COVID precautions, I'm almost certain that your card is expired. And you need to be thinking about getting your first aid and CPR certifications updated. So that's the only reason I mentioned that is because it's an issue that's very easy to forget about, but could be important in at a time when you just don't expect it.
Mine's 10 years out of date.
I'm sorry?
Mine's 10 years out of date.
Well, I think mine's only 8 out of date, so I'm still current.
Bob, on that point, will you send us that information so we can do what we need to do to register?
Well, we haven't asked the city to do it yet, so I wanted to, I sent the note around asking if we could make a recommendation to the city. And people seem to think that we didn't need to do that. So,
Okay.
So we don't have it on the agenda now. If you guys would like to make that recommendation, just send me a note. And if we've got a majority, I'll be happy to endorse it and send it forward to the city. But,
Can I make a motion so we can move forward with it? Do we need that formality or no?
no, we have enough people if you want to. I think that's appropriate under the rules of order. So what's your motion, Don?
So I move that we move forward to for all Foothills CPC council people to get their first aid certification.
Okay, you're asking that we request that the city provide a CPC certification course
Correct.
at a date and time to be determined.
TBD, yeah.
Hi, guys, this is Kathy. I guess I would disagree a little bit. I mean, are you looking at making this mandatory or voluntary, and maybe how many of us are interested or
Voluntary.
do that? I know I'm probably going to have to get CPR certified through a health club that I'm going to be working part-time at. And I think the city already.
Voluntary.
Voluntary.
Yeah,
Absolutely voluntary, Catherine.
No, okay, that's great. But the city, I think, already offers many courses like that through the Red Cross, through the university. So it might be something that, we could just look online and find a course that's nearby rather than put a formal resolution through, just to save time and energy.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think we should look into that. It was just a suggestion because I saw 3 accidents in one afternoon last week, and I didn't do anything. And when I used to be in the fire department and I used to be in the ambulance, I was first responder. I don't have those skills anymore, and it made me feel bad that I should have been able to stop and offer some help if needed. And I just sort of mentioned it. It seems to me that CPC is a group of people who want to help other people, and maybe we want to do that.
Yeah, and I agree, and I think that should be totally optional and each to their own. But I guess I would also kind of stay clear of any expectations that, that we actually should be doing that, because from a
Yeah,
law enforcement perspective,
I-
you can cause a lot more harm than help sometimes.
I agree. I've done this before years ago, like 100 years ago, but they do, like if you ask, when you request a training, they do ask that you get a small group of people together, like, for that class. So I think it would be perfect for us, whoever wants to do it. And I do agree. Maybe, Mr. Chair, maybe I can, say my motion again. So I, for clarification purposes. So
Sounds good.
I move that we consider a first aid certification training for CPC, Foothills CPC council people, not making it mandatory. So optional.
Optional too, very much so, because there are some people, for one reason or another, who would prefer not to be providing first aid. Oh, yes, sir.
Yeah, just for further discussion on it. I saw a message come in on the chat from one of those that have attended, and they're wondering, well, if we're going to do it for the CPC, could we open it up for others outside the CPC? Which I think is a valid question, because we have individuals that are showing up to our events, hearing what we have to say, hearing our different individuals that come talk, and so they might want to be a part of that as well.
Well,
Yeah, I was gonna say that too. After Kathy spoke, I'm like, we should open it up for everyone if we're gonna do it for us, in case other people see something like that and they can use that same training as well. And in regards to her, like us looking for someone independently, I think it's good if we do it through the city. So that way it shows exposure that the CPC is doing something, and it might let other CPCs do it as well in other districts. So I think it's giving good exposure and stuff. So I'm for it.
I think that's one of the great things about this group. We start off someplace and end up someplace else that's even better. So the way I'm understanding it, people are not against the idea of first aid training, but you're thinking more of Foothills CPC and inviting members of the community, CPC members at large.
Yeah, or
to-
we could even make it an event.
I think let's see if we can do something like that. Idalia, do you think you could see what might be available and see what the costs, if any, are, and then pass it back to us?
Sure. What do you have a contact person for the city that
I
you
do
can?
not.
No. Okay.
I'm
I'll find out.
totally oblivious on that.
Okay, I'll find out and I'll forward it to everyone.
Excellent.
Sounds good.
So, having done all of that for about 16 minutes,
Just one thing.
I think it's time to ask Commander Collins to weigh in with his update. And then we have 2 special guests this evening who are already here and ready to go. So Commander Collins.
Good evening, everyone. How are you all tonight? I hope you had a good Halloween and got lots of trick-or-treaters if you participated in that. I know our neighborhood had a bunch, so it was kind of nice to see that things were getting back to somewhat normal again. So I'll move right into it. So our CAD highlights for the month of, I'm sorry, what month are we in? I don't even, it's going so.
October was just passed.
Yeah, it's October. I was just talking about Halloween. Jeez. So our CAD highlights that we had, we did have, according to this, only 2 guns stolen as a result of an auto burglary. So we've been kind of flat on that the last, I think, 2 or 3 months. So better, not great, but better. So I think that's, people are starting to take care of that a little bit more. We did have 24 commercial robbery calls. We had no residential robbery calls, or what we would call like a home invasion. We did have 1 carjacking, 4 individual robberies, 26 auto thefts, 2 of which were warm-ups. So that's gonna, when we talked about this, I think last year, as the months start getting a little bit colder, folks like to go out and leave their cars running so they're nice and toasty when they go get in, which I totally get. But that is just, unless you have a device like the auto start from your key fob, or the ability to take your keys with you and leave your car running, that'd be the only way that I would do that, just because it does open your vehicle up to just be stolen rather easily. We had 37 commercial burglaries, 40 residential burglaries, and 50 auto burglaries. So we're moving into the time of the year where the holidays and people like to go shopping, and they go from store to store to store, and sometimes they'll leave things in their vehicles. Auto burglary, we've talked about this. Auto burglary is absolutely a crime of opportunity, and it's 100% preventable, in the sense that if we don't have anything for them to steal, then it's not an auto burglary. So just pass the word that leaving packages in your car, purchased items as you move from store to store, please do your best to avoid that. If you have to, cover them up with something, a jacket, a blanket. My dogs are about to blow up. Hold on. Okay, they're not. But that's going to be a real problem when the shopping season really kicks off. Also, I'm sorry, can you guys hear that? Let me mute that.
About the shopping issue, I've told people for years, if you're going into Macy's and bringing packages out, and then you're going to go back in the store, move your car, drive out and go in from a different direction, because somebody is watching.
Yeah, that's very true. I mean, we do get some cases where, some of the burglars will just sit in parking lots and just watch. So just be mindful of the stupid dog. Just be mindful of your surroundings, as we always talk about, but just be really cognizant of the fact that in these shopping center parking lots, the burglars are going to be looking for just easy stuff to take. Let's see, the other thing we're going to be getting, and this was touched on and I'm still learning about it, but it was touched on in the newsletter about the new technology. It's called Spider Tech. So my understanding of that is when you call 242 cops or call radio to request police assistance, that a text message will let you know the time that the time delay, and then if an officer is en route. Much past that, I don't really know a whole lot about it. I know that Lieutenant Garrett was asked to be on part of that project. So as I learn more about it, And then he's able to kind of explain a little bit better as he works through it. We'll have some more information on it, but it sounds like a pretty good idea, because I think some of the problems we run into when folks call 242 cops is it's the unknown waiting game. They just sit and wait and sit and wait and sit and wait, which that's not fair to anybody. At least if you have an idea of how long it's going to be, then maybe you do something else in the meantime and then be ready for when the police are able to respond. So I think that's going to be kind of something neat that I think is going to be really beneficial. And I know you all got the use of force numbers, if I remember correctly, but talking about that briefly. So remember we talked about last month that we were over at 3.3 uses of force per 1,000 calls. And I said that was an anomaly. This right here, we are at 0.6 per 1,000. So we dropped 3 times, almost dramatically from it. Again, I don't have any intelligent reason as to why we're at 3.3 and why we're at 0.6 right now. So, but like I said, the Foothills typically, just about everything in every category of the Foothills, we are generally about in the middle of all 6 area commands. So this month, we're actually the least amount. I mean, we've even used less than Northwest, and Northwest is typically at the very bottom all the time. So I think that's all I have for right now. Does anybody have any questions?
Paul?
Just quickly, and correct me if I'm wrong, but in the past with homicides, I believe I heard that it's typically repeat offenders. I know homicides are still occurring. We see them in the news, the numbers going up. Is it still repeat offenders? Are we able to even say that at this point, or you're getting everybody? And maybe that's a wrong statement. Maybe it's not repeat offenders is the common thing.
You know, I don't, I would say that that's not totally impossible. I think it probably is. As far as the ones that are occurring in Albuquerque, nothing comes to mind that somebody is a repeat homicide offender. Now they might have a bit of a criminal record prior to that, which the majority of them do. But as far as repeat homicides, nothing.
I guess that's what I meant. I didn't really mean repeat homicide offenders. I was thinking just individuals that went to the court system continuously, they get out, and then a homicide happens.
Yeah, we do see, and I can actually get some better information on that from the violent crimes division. But based on like the homicides that we have up in the Foothills, a lot of the offenders, they do have criminal records. So,
okay.
yes.
Yeah, I was just looking if there was any themes, since clearly that's a hot topic these days, is the rise in homicides, and I was just wondering if there's anything that find any trends. But that's it for me. I know Idalia has a question. So.
Yes, ma'am.
Hi, Commander. I just want to say thank you. I did a ride along a few weeks ago with Sergeant Tracy. I did the graveyard shift, and you'd be so proud of me. I lasted 8 hours.
Really?
Yeah.
You know, I have to say that I haven't worked graveyard since 2005. And it was the happiest day of my career when I got off of graveyard because it hurt so bad. And so for you to be able to ride that shift, I'm incredibly impressed. So I hope you had a good time and you got to get some experiences out there.
I did, and I learned so much. It was eye-opening, and I highly recommend to anyone to do a ride along if you can. But I want to thank you, and she's amazing. Sarge is amazing.
Oh, Sergeant Drager?
Yes.
Yes.
Tracy? Yeah.
Well, good. I will pass that along, and thanks for going to that. And for the board, I mean, if you all have not done one yet, let me know, and we can get that set up, and you can ride. If you want to be brave like Adalia, please ride graveyard. If not, we could set you up on day shift or swing shift. That's easy. So just let me know.
On that point, if anyone does graveyard, be prepared for drama. There is drama, a lot. So it's awesome though.
Yeah, if you all can stay up those hours, bravo, because I can't. And I mean, 11 o'clock and I'm not doing so well. So I applaud anybody that can stay up that late. But seriously, the board, whoever has not done one yet, and you want to, just reach out and I'll get you set up.
That's excellent because it wasn't available in the height of the precautions. So
And something that, I mean, she's kind of an anomaly. Most folks don't ride the full 8 hours. So that's another kudos. If you want to ride 4 hours, 5 hours, you can ride pretty much whatever you can stand or whatever you're able to do. We can get it set up.
She's a tough cookie.
Clearly, without a doubt.
Thank you.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, Commander Collins. I'm sure there will be questions that come up during the presentation tonight.
Yeah,
so thank you very much. And time then to move along to our special guests, Pastor Shelley Repp, who's the director of New Mexico Dream Center, which deals with many things, but a lot of it with missing and abused children. And Sergeant Shane Bailey. Sergeant Bailey is here. He's representing the abused children team at the APD. So you guys were going to decide your own format, your own sequence. How do you want to proceed, Pastor Repp?
I'm fine with going first or second, however, whatever is more convenient for Sergeant Bailey.
You have the floor, ma'am, by all means.
All right. Thank you. I appreciate that. And I just want to confirm that I have the ability to share my screen. Is that correct?
It should be if you move your pointer toward the bottom of your screen.
Right.
You should get a share screen.
Awesome. Got it. Okay. Let me go ahead and get that started just real quickly to make sure that we are good to go. And I just want to make sure that you guys see it's loading, it's continuing to load. New Mexico Dream Center, the first slide. Is that a yes?
Yes.
Awesome.
We could see it. Thank you.
Awesome. I appreciate that because when I'm presenting, I kind of take off seeing y'all. And so thank you so much. My name is Shelley Repp. I am the director of New Mexico Dream Center. I am retired clergy. And so I had worked with children and families for about 22 years. And then in 2016, I was invited to be part of the New Mexico Human Trafficking Task Force that was started out of the Attorney General's office. At that point, I had been working with human trafficking victims since 2011 and had started programming to provide support for those victims. And so that's kind of how they found out about me. And then in 2018, I took my nonprofit and joined it with New Mexico Dream Center to have a more robust organization, and took over as the executive director. New Mexico Dream Center has 3 different programs and we're working on a 4th. And so we provide aftercare for victims of human trafficking. The aftercare is transitional living, emergency shelter, and case management. And then we also have a drop-in center for youth experiencing homelessness. And part of what we'll talk about today is that aspect in itself of the ties of vulnerable populations such as homeless youth and trafficking. And then we have outreach to both populations, trafficking victims and homeless youth. And we are working on New Mexico's very first residential program for minors who have survived trafficking. And we're hoping to be able to have that program up and running by September of next week. And next week, geez, September of next year. Let me try that a little bit better. Sorry about that. And so I am going to kind of go through some information about human trafficking. And if you have questions, please feel free to put those in the chat and I will answer them as best as I can. All righty, let's get going here. Okay, so the first thing we want to talk about is actually what is sex trafficking. And so sex trafficking has three different pieces that equal the equation, the formula for trafficking. It is a criminal act that is defined as the recruitment, harboring, and transportation, provision, patronizing, soliciting of a person. That's the act. The purpose of that is commercial sex or sex in exchange for anything of value. And then the methods, so this is how it happens, is through the use of force, fraud, or coercion. So basically force, just like it sounds, you get beaten if you don't do what you're told. Fraud, somebody tricks you into doing the work that you are doing. Or coercion, you're manipulated into that situation. The exception to all of these is if the person who is induced into the sex acts, the commercial sex acts, is under the age of 18. By federal law, that person is considered to be a victim and not a criminal, and cannot be considered a prostitute in any way, shape, or form. Now, the important thing that we need to understand about why we see human trafficking kind of exploding on the scene in the United States is that it is absolutely a very profitable crime. So it's estimated that worldwide human trafficking brings in $150 billion, and that is billion with a B, which is more than Netflix, Starbucks, Disney, and Coca-Cola combined. So it is a hugely profitable criminal enterprise that is seen in every single country around the globe. This right here is a heat map that shows human trafficking within the United States. So of course, the redder that the dot is, the more trafficking that you would see in that location. So as you look at that, you see obviously our port areas are going to be very high for trafficking. Here's little old New Mexico right here. We see that human trafficking is something that is very much tied to the economy and the population of any particular area. So for us, what we see is a lot of trafficking down here on our border with Texas and Mexico. This is basically the entry point into the United States, Mexico, from Texas. And so we see that happening right over here. Albuquerque is our next biggest hotspot right here in the center of the state. And then some of the areas you see follow our interstates and then follow the oil pan that we share here with Texas. And so all of those areas are places where we have had human trafficking reports that have gone to the federal level. So not all trafficking reports are going to hit the federal level, but these are the ones that do, and that shows kind of how we see that in New Mexico. So obviously we have a pretty small population, so our trafficking footprint is going to be a little bit smaller, but it's definitely still a footprint here in the United States. One of the things that we really work on with New Mexico Dream Center is we work on what's called domestic minor sex trafficking. And that is actually the trafficking of American-born children. And so most people, when you talk about human trafficking, think about it as something with immigrants and immigrants being brought in, which absolutely is the case. However, it is not exclusive to the immigrant population. And some of the stats that we've seen is that the estimate of immigrants who have been brought into the United States or trafficked into the United States is about 14 to 18,000. The estimate of American-born people who are being trafficked is between 100 and 300,000. So you can see there's a lot more of the American-born, our own citizens who are being trafficked within the United States than the immigrant trafficking that we see. So here's kind of the map to see why this is such a profitable crime. So these are Albuquerque prices. So one girl at $50 for a 15-minute sex act, she can do about 20 dates a day at that, and it's 7 days a week. She's going to bring in $364,000, all untaxed. Then if you have 4 girls doing that, you're bringing in almost $1.5 million. And that would be one trafficker. The familiar term for a trafficker would be a pimp. And so that would be one pimp. Now, what we see here in Albuquerque and what we see across the United States are a couple of different models of trafficking. And we will we'll talk about what those models are as we continue. But that kind of shows why this is such a big deal. The other thing is who's buying sex, who's actually doing that. It is overwhelmingly male. We have had some people who've asked, well, are females out there? Are they buying men? And the fact of the matter is that very rarely, if ever, happens. It is over 99% of all the purchasers of sex are male. They come from a variety of employment sectors. And in looking at that, we see that many of our trafficking victims aren't just women and children. So we do see women and children, but we also see male trafficking victims, and we see the LGBTQ community being trafficked at a really, really high rate. And with all of that, it is still males that are doing that trafficking. So here's our 2020 stats that we're looking at. So the first one is NCMEC. So this is the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. So they reported 17 cyber tips of missing and exploited children that had been generated here in New Mexico. Our Human Trafficking National Hotline made 22 referrals for services for New Mexicans being trafficked. CYFD is the Children, Youth, and Families Department. So that is our child welfare department. Their SCI system, and SCI stands for Statewide Central Intake. That's essentially the number that you call if you're reporting abuse or neglect. In 2019, they started putting screening questions in to screen for trafficking. With that, in 2020, they produced 285 reports asking for investigations into child trafficking in the state of New Mexico. We've had 39 confirmed victims who are working with law enforcement in 2020. And then for service providers, we've estimated as service providers another 226 victims that we've provided services to that aren't necessarily working with law enforcement. And then we're going to get to this number right here, ICAC. So ICAC stands for Internet Crimes Against Children. In 2020, there were 2,200 child enticement tips. So a child enticement tip is when an adult is trying to set up a date to have sex with a child. Now, previous to 2020, when we looked at child enticement through ICAC, we were averaging around 300-ish for the state of New Mexico. Then 2020 hit, our world absolutely became a virtual world, and we ended up with over 2,000 times when adults were trying to entice kids for dates. That's a pretty big number, and that's a pretty significant concern that we should all have here within the state of New Mexico. This year in the legislature, we worked on House Bill 56, which was a piece of legislature addressing the crime of trafficking. Specifically, it was asking to change the definition around trafficking, those who are doing the trafficking, from being just considered a regular criminal charge to being considered a sex crime. And so this legislature flew through the House, and it got halted in the Senate with 7 other pieces of legislation that were all out there to try to protect children and did not pass. And so if you want to read this bill, you are welcome to absolutely do that. It's House Bill 56. Make sure when you do that and you're Googling for that, that you're looking for the 2020 House bill so that you don't get a different piece of legislation and start reading it and be like, what is this? This has nothing to do with trafficking. So make sure that you put that it's for the 2020 legislative session. Now, this picture on the right that we have shows 5 guys that were all picked up a few weeks back by BCSO when they did a call op. Every single one of these guys was trying to set up a date with somebody that they thought was a 15-year-old girl. And so within that, we have people who were working within the Department of Health itself. We have guys who have been seen as former traffickers before. And so we need to understand that when we look at human trafficking, when we look at sex trafficking specifically, we are not exempt from that. It happens in our neighborhoods, it happens in our communities, and we need to be aware of it. In my agency, we were working with the Attorney General on an investigation with one of our current clients. And this client was with the investigator, and she was pointing out where she was being held during the trafficking situation. Well, where she was being held was at a local park that was 3 blocks away from where I live. I walk my dog by that park every single day. And so it's important we all understand that this happens in our city, this happens in our community, and we need to be aware of it. So with that, I'm going to go through real quickly 4 different models of entry into human trafficking that we see here in Albuquerque across the state of New Mexico. These are probably the most common ones that we have in our state. So the first one would be called lover boy trafficking. So in this model of trafficking, it is absolutely relationship based. It is when somebody is portraying themselves as having a love interest to another person. And so this person works very hard on developing a personal relationship with, let's just for the simplicity of it, say a girl. And so the lover boy works hard on building that relationship with this girl. As he builds that relationship, he is getting closer and closer to her and pushing her further and further away from the protective measures that are around her. So that can be her family, that could be her school, that could be friends. His goal is to be able to isolate her and then be able to have control of her. So lover boy trafficking is something that we see all around the United States. And we recently had an event happen actually in Moriarty, where we were called by the county manager, and the county manager had called and said, we've got somebody who identifies that they are being like sexually exploited, and we kind of don't know what to do. Well, what happened was a 16-year-old girl was online, and she was kind of developing this relationship over the internet with this person that she had never met in face-to-face. And as they continued to get closer and closer and closer, he said, hey, you know what? Let's get together. Let's go on a date. Now, this girl happened to live in San Diego, California, and the guy asking her out for the date said, you know, don't tell your parents, just come on out. And she believed him. She sneaked out of her house and went down the street and got in the car with him. Well, he didn't take her on a date. He took her down through Tijuana, trafficked her across Mexico, came back up through the San Antonio port of entry down there by El Paso, and then was taking her through New Mexico with the intent of getting her to Denver, Colorado. Well, they stopped in Moriarty, for gas, and she went in to use the bathroom. So what he did was he waited outside the restroom just to make sure she was going to come back out. Well, while she was in the restroom, there was a lady there, and she asked to borrow her cell phone, and the lady agreed to let her do that. And so she called her mom, and then her mom called the police, and that's how she was identified. That was an example of lover boy trafficking, and that's an example of how quickly things can happen. We had another 16-year-old girl who fell victim to this kind of trafficking when somebody she'd never met before portrayed himself to be her boyfriend, sent her a plane ticket. She flew to LA, and we haven't seen her since. And so this is something that happens in our city, and this is something we need our children, we need families to know is going on. We need to protect those young people from these kinds of relationships. The next most common type of trafficking we see in New Mexico is familial sex trafficking. Now, familial sex trafficking has two different branches to it. The first branch is actually families who have been trafficking their children for years upon generations upon years. And so it would be a grandfather who traffics his grandchildren, or an uncle who traffics his nieces and nephews. And it's something that's been happening in this family for as long as they can remember. A lot of times when you see those really sensational headlines about like 160 children rescued from a sex trafficking ring, almost always those are those familial sex trafficking rings, because they keep those kids very cloistered. A lot of times they're not even in the school systems, they're homeschooled. And so they're kind of these shadow children. They're these hidden children, and we don't know anything about them. We had a gal who came to us from actually the West Side Shelter for Services at 36 years old. And that's pretty old for somebody in our program. We generally kind of seem to cap out at 25 years old. Well, this gal had been trafficked from 9 years old by her father. And the way that she was able to get away from him was she ran away from him at the state fair where he was selling her. And she ended up going to the West Side Shelter because she was homeless. She didn't know where to go or what to do. And that's how she was able to get away from her father at 36 years old. That's how long she had been in this. The other branch of familial sex trafficking is needs-based. And generally that happens when a family really starts to fall apart because of substance use or addiction issues. So mom and dad, or mom and or dad, end up getting addicted. And what we see here in Albuquerque is heroin and meth. And so they end up getting addicted, and they start kind of just using up all the family's resources. And so pretty soon they're out of money. They can't pay rent. They can't pay their phones. They can't pay food. They can't do those things. And what they end up doing to create income for themselves is they end up selling their children. And that's something that we see also in New Mexico. We had 2 years ago a second grader who was identified by her teacher as a sex trafficking victim. And basically what was happening was she was being sold online by her parents. And so that's what familial sex trafficking looks like. The next form of sex trafficking we've got is gang control trafficking. And we know that here in Albuquerque specifically, but across the state of New Mexico, gangs are a big part of what is happening in our city and in our state. We've got international gangs in Albuquerque. We've got national gangs like the Crips and the Bloods, and we've got the local like neighborhood or corner gangs, all within our city and within our state. Now, gangs, just like any other enterprise, have to create income for themselves. And so it used to be, and they still do this, but it used to be that it was primarily the sale of drugs or the sale of arms, guns specifically, that they would use to create income. But part of the whole kind of gang attitude and ethic is young people who come into that gang and want to be in that gang, and it's both boys and girls. Well, what gangs have realized is that it is easier and safer for them and more profitable for them to take those girls that want to come into gangs and use them as sex trafficking victims. And so they sell them over and over and over again, and are therefore able to generate money in that way. Most of the clients that we work with that come to us via essentially law enforcement are gang trafficking victims. They've been used in one of the gangs here within the city or the state of New Mexico. And then the final form that we see in New Mexico is basically homeless youth exploitation. So it's estimated in Albuquerque through an agency called New Day Youth and Family Services that we have within a year anywhere from 5,000 to 7,000 homeless youth. Now, there's some national stats that are really, really concerning when you look at homeless kids, homeless teens specifically. Generally, they will be approached by a trafficker within 48 hours of being on the street. They will end up in sex trafficking relationships, or they will live by survival sex. Now, the reason for that is because unlike adult homeless folks, they can't access services and they have barriers to services that the adult homeless population doesn't have to face. An adult homeless person can get food stamps for themselves. A homeless kid can't. There are 2 homeless youth shelters with less than 75 beds between them, and there are multiple adult shelters. An adult can get their ID for themselves. A youth can't. There's all these different types of barriers and issues that contribute to a teen on the street as being extremely vulnerable and extremely exploitable. One of the clients that I want to tell you the story about is an example of how quickly this can happen and how scary it really is. So this client of ours came to us at 19 years old. At 16, she was kicked out of her house. So her mom was a single mom and was just struggling. And our gal was causing all sorts of problems at school. She was getting in trouble at school. She was getting in trouble at home. And the mom just didn't know what to do, and she'd had enough. And so basically she thrust her backpack. She gave that to her and she said, "That's it. You're out. You're going to have to figure it out on your own. This is tough love." And she kicked her out of the house. Well, our girl kind of wandered around trying to figure out what she was going to do. And she was texting her friends and trying to see if she could couch surf and stay at their house. But she wasn't having any luck with that. Well, she ended up on the corner of Wyoming and Central, which I'm sure we got police on this call. They can tell you that is the war zone, and that's a pretty crazy part of town. And she ended up there. And so she was scrolling through her phone, trying to figure out what she was going to do when this guy rolled up. And he rolled up to her and he jumped out of the car and he came over and he said, "Man, you look like you have been having a terrible day." And she was like, "Yes, it's the worst. It's the worst." And he said, "Well, you want to come to a party with me?" Well, she said, yes. Now, those of us would sit here and we go, "No, you never get in the car with a stranger." But when you can't go home, you don't know what to do. Maybe there'll be somebody at that party that you know. Maybe you can stay at that party. You start making these kinds of decisions. And so the girl got in the car and the man went around to get in on the driver's side. Well, after he closed the door, she went to, plug in her seatbelt and she looked at the inside panel of the car and there was no door. There was no handle for her to get out of. No way for her to open that door. And when he slid in on the driver's side, he pulled out the gun from behind his back and he slapped it on his lap and he looked at that gun and he looked at her and she thought she was dead. She's like, "That's it. I'm not, I'm going to die." And he took her to a local motel and he told her to go take a shower. So while she was in the shower, he went through her backpack and he laid all those items on the bed. When she came out, he said, "This is your name." And he read off her name. "And this is where you live. And it looks like you have a mom and a sister. And if you don't want anything to happen to them, you are going to do exactly what I tell you to do." And he raped her and he sold her. She had been on the streets of Albuquerque less than 12 hours. We have to realize that a kid who is homeless, a kid who is unaccompanied on the streets is extremely, extremely vulnerable. And if we think about this, and if we look at this, we all have these concerns about this homeless population in Albuquerque. If we could address youth homelessness, we would, by attrition, be flipping the script for the chronic adult homeless and addicted population. And we could be saving lives from traffickers if we looked and decided we really wanted to address this as an issue within our city and within our state. So that being said, this is where traffickers recruit. Mainly, they're recruiting on social media and the internet. 1 in 9 teens will receive unwanted sexual solicitations, and 1 in 3 will meet people in person who they first met online. I was recently teaching a class at Gilbert Senna High School, and I did a poll in each of the classes that I was teaching at, and every single class, 85% or more of those kids raised their hands that they had met people online first before they ever met them in person. And we have to realize how dangerous that happens. Traffickers can make themselves appear to be anybody behind the screen, so to speak. They still will recruit at schools, malls, parks, shelters, and group homes. In fact, we know that they tend to hang out at parks that are near the homeless youth shelters or different group homes in Albuquerque. And it happens everywhere. We see that it happens in the hotels and motels in our city. We see that it happens at sporting events. It happens all over the city and the state. Why don't these folks just leave? So often we see pictures where we think about those traffickers and we see these images of young people in handcuffs or being tied to beds, and that's not what the reality is. They're trapped by their circumstances, and they're trapped by what's happened to them, how that how that trafficker coerces them. So that's why they're trapped, and that's how they end up staying. So what do you do if you see something? The first thing is you always call 911. New Mexico Dream Center isn't law enforcement. We can't kick down doors. But if you see something happening and something dangerous, you always call 911. If you see a young person and you're concerned that they're being trafficked or abused, you want to make that Sky report, and you make that at #safe on your cell phone, and then always call law enforcement as well. They're supposed to cross-reference, but there's sometimes some disconnects between CYFD and law enforcement. If there's somebody that you're worried about, talk to them, build trust, find reasons to talk to them. And then underneath here are some resources for you. The Attorney General's office has a unit specifically dedicated to this. They will investigate. For New Mexico Dream Center, our hotline, which is a 24/7 response line, is this 505-504-1301 number. Our office line is 900-3833, and you can always call the National Human Trafficking Hotline. So I'm going to stop the sharing. And I know that we have some hands up, but I don't know if I'm out of time. So I'm gonna stop and let somebody tell me what to do.
Hey, I don't have any intention of trying to tell you what to do, Ms. Repp, but before we close at 8 o'clock, I'd like to have you and Sergeant Bailey address the question of who is buying these services.
Absolutely. Do you want me to go ahead and let Sergeant Bailey speak, and then we can do a Q&A at the end with the two of us?
That sounds like a lovely, great idea.
All right. Well, I will stop talking then.
Can you hear me? Am I on?
Absolutely, Sergeant Bailey.
Okay, that's going to be a hard act to follow. I don't have a PowerPoint with me. I am Sergeant Bailey with the Albuquerque Police Department Child Exploitation Detail. Specifically, what we are centered and focused on is a lot of the use of the internet, computers, and technology to entice children. Again, as Ms. Repp had said, we really picked up in the year 2020. If you stop and think about it, we had entire school districts that were sitting at home with parents that were still at work. These kids weren't out with their friends. They weren't able to get out and do stuff with their friends. So we did see a great increase in the amount of contacts that children were getting online while they were staying home. That's been a majority of what we did for 2020. We kind of moved away from the texting and the ICAC, as she explained earlier, the ICAC portion of our job. It was all we could do to keep up with just the local reports that we were getting from kids and parents about being approached online. And it definitely has increased and it stayed high. It hasn't gone back down. I think sadly, it's going to be something that stays with us from here on out. But for us with the sex trafficking end of it, like she said, we look specifically at the law. We don't offer any services outside of just strictly law enforcement. And there does have to be basically a simple way to think about it is you either have to be enticed or forcing somebody into a sexual act or commercial sex act to break the law, or you have to gain something from it. And a lot of it for me, when I came over to this job, was just changing my perception of it. It was people, not Miss Repp personally, but people like her that kind of changed my perception. It's just something that we used to call prostitution. Back 20 years ago, when I first started this job, it was just prostitution, and you arrested Johns and you arrested prostitutes, and you didn't think much of it. Now I've kind of changed my attitude towards it, and 99% of the people that are out there that are doing what we used to call prostitution, they are being taken advantage of. They are being forced, coerced, as Ms. Repp described, specifically in our arena with the children. We deal mainly with people under 18 years of age. And a lot of ours, it's not really what you see on TV here in Albuquerque. At least we haven't run into it. I'm not saying it does not exist. But if you have a vision of, like they have in Hollywood, that these girls are getting, kidnapped in Mexico and shipped up here and then sold in Russia. For us, it's really not that way. We don't see a lot of that. Again, I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but what we do see is a majority of what we deal with are the young kids that have been kicked out of their houses, that grew up in bad situations. Those are the ones that we're dealing with almost on a daily basis. We just had one that we had to deal with last week that we were doing interviews on, and brave little girl for being 14 years old. But I can't imagine she had been kicked out of her house at 12 years old. Her parents had kicked her out of her house, and she's been surviving on the streets, and this is how she survived. And it took approximately, I think, 16 law enforcement encounters before she even agreed to answer any questions about what she does. That's something that we run into quite a bit, and I know Ms. Repp has people that were sex trafficking victims that do give speeches, but it usually takes us about, and I say us, I'm referring to law enforcement, approximately 25 to 30 contacts with somebody that we suspect is a human trafficker or being human trafficked. It takes about 25 to 30 law enforcement contacts for us to finally get them to talk. Or at least be willing for them to talk. Well, if you stop and think about it, your average person on the street, that could be 5-6 years over that time span. And she's not contacting the same police officer day in and day out. It's always somebody new. So that's a real struggle for us, especially with the kids. And as Ms. Repp said, that, in Albuquerque, that's what we see a lot of is the kids. We did have kind of a surge of over 18 when the pandemic hit and they shut down Las Vegas. There was a surge here in town, but those were the over 18 crowd. What we mainly deal with is the 16 and under. And Ms. Repp kind of touched on it a little bit, but our biggest problem in the state is we have no place to send these girls. They're 15, 16 years old, and they're living what they consider free. Nobody's telling them what to do. And, for us, the only place we have to send them is CYFD, and they either go to some kind of program or to some kind of treatment foster care. And many times they run away from that. As a matter of fact, with all our CYFD cases, we're batting 100% that the minute we put them into CYFD care, within 24 to 48 hours, they're gone again. They just run away. And that's something that I think the state needs to get a handle on. And I know her legislation did address that to a great extent, but that's going to be the best solution we can have. We can only do so much in tracking people down, especially when it's hard for us to build enough trust with these victims that they actually do talk to us about it. If they don't talk to us about it, we can't press any charges. We actually have to have a 16-year-old girl come to us and say that she's being trafficked. We can't trust our gut instinct. We can't trust what other people think or the opinions of other. And that's what the frustrating part about it is. So in a nutshell, that's what we deal with, the child exploitation as far as the human trafficking or the sex trafficking goes. We don't really deal with human trafficking on the labor end of it. That's more of a federal nexus that we don't deal with. So if you guys have any questions, I think Ms. Repp pretty much did an outstanding job on presenting what this is and what we're dealing with in our state, specifically in Albuquerque.
This is Kathy. I would like to ask a question if possible.
Yes, go ahead, Catherine.
So I'm just curious, I know you've talked about, and I'm glad you just brought up the labor trafficking, and that was going to be one of my questions. What is your expectation? How do you expect this influx of immigrants, illegal immigrants, unaccompanied minors to impact these numbers in the next year? I know you're dealing specifically with domestic trafficking, sex trafficking, but what is the expectation for these immigrants and who may or may not be winding up the street in New Mexico or across the country?
Well, is that for me or?
Yeah, anyone who wants to answer it. Yeah, law enforcement preferably first.
I'll be honest with you, we really don't track those numbers as far as, you know, immigrants, migrant children. I know there is, we do deal a lot with federal partners in this, and there obviously is a great concern, especially with the children, and they're just easy for predators. You think about them coming over, no family, no mom, no dad. They'll be lucky to have siblings that they can stay with, because a lot of places, you know, will take one kid, but they can't take four. So, you know, it's a predator's dream. Honestly, I'll be honest with you. And that's from the child exploitation side of it versus the sex trafficking side of it.
Right. And my other concern, though, is you mentioned the gang activity and the gang aspects of this as one of your 4 prongs. And if we have international gangs here in New Mexico, and yeah, I kind of highly expect that they're taking part in this as well. And so I'm curious, wouldn't it behoove us to be working more closely with the feds on some of these issues? And why aren't we working more closely with the feds and tracking it? And secondly, maybe this is for you, Shelley. I know you said your bill didn't pass, and I'd be curious as to know why it didn't pass. What were some of the reasons that it didn't pass? And, you know, what have we done or what can we do to improve it so we can get additional services or whatever you're looking for?
So I'm going to say a few things, and then please, Sergeant Bailey, you jump in as well. So it's important to understand, which is why I'm so glad Sergeant Bailey is here, is that we're coming from 2 different perspectives, because he is coming through the law enforcement lens and we're coming through the service provider lens. And those lenses have different goals. We work together a lot, but that doesn't mean that there's not different goals. So I'm going to talk a little bit about working with the feds. And so for our agency, we work with local, state, and federal, all of that. And particularly when we're looking at the kind of immigration issues and looking at potential trafficking victims coming into the state of New Mexico in the form of foreign nationals, we're looking at Homeland Security. And so depending on kind of what that situation is and how they're able to help, Homeland Security is the agency that tends to be the lead, at least in my eyes. And Sergeant Bailey, if I'm incorrect in that, please let me know. But that's what we have seen, at least in the state of New Mexico, from the service provider side of things when it comes to that. When we're looking at the bill that we had looked at, it was basically what happened is, even though it had an early introduction number, it was 56. And so it was introduced very early in the legislative session. Basically, it was stalled in the Senate Finance Committee. So there was no given reason why, other than they didn't have enough time to hear it. The interesting thing within the Senate Finance Committee is that all of the child welfare bills were stalled and did not pass. They were all just held there. And so we did have one senator, Senator Crystal Diamond, who actually had called out Senator Joseph Cervantes, who was one of the chairs for that committee, and asking why these none of the child welfare bills were being heard, and he did not reply to that. The interesting thing is, since then, the CYFD Cabinet Secretary, Brian Blaylock, basically was stepped down, but he was asked to step down by our governor for many reasons. And after that, when the Senate looked into that, Senator Joseph Cervantes then talked about all of the reports and things that were coming through the Child Welfare Department that were very alarming. If he had read the bills and if he had looked at that, he would have seen that information presented at that time. So we're very hopeful that the next time around, there'll be a little bit more awareness around the issue. I think that is a big thing in New Mexico that we do need to raise, is the awareness around human trafficking and what that looks like. Again, people think it's generally going to be related to foreign nationals, but that is not always the case. And if we are looking at protecting our citizens, we need to understand that our children are at risk.
And just to chime in on the Homeland Security, we do work with them as far as the children that are coming over that are unaccompanied. A lot of those go through the Health and Human Services Department, and we are lucky enough that my unit does have a full-time person in our office that we can go through. But right now, I think there was a push at some point last year to bring kids up to Glorieta, and that would have been what we would have, I say we, what that would have been under the Health and Human Services Department, not the HSI. I think HSI really gets involved more with the labor trafficking end of it. But they do also, if we do have a good case, if we can show international or interstate nexus traveling, then we can use HSI for a federal prosecution versus just a state. And we tend to go with those if we can.
What kind of involvement does the federal government have? Is that FBI? Is that?
Right now, the way it works with us is if we get a case that comes to us and it has to reach a federal nexus, interstate travel with for the intent of sex trafficking or anything like that. Basically, if you would think of the laws they have for drugs, interstate transportation of drugs, just substitute drugs and place children there, or people, not just children. I say children because that's who I deal with, and that's how we work with the federal, the end of it with HSI. FBI does have an outstanding unit that deals with it. And I believe we have one of our sex crime detectives is attached to that unit. They're actually flying somewhere in the Caribbean with some arrest warrants to pick some people up for a sex trafficking case they picked up. But we use it mainly, we use the feds because they have bigger penalties and an easier threshold to reach as far as prosecution goes for interstate sex trafficking. If
You have your paw up.
Oh, did you call on me? Sorry, it broke up.
Yes.
Okay, so hi, this is Idalia. Thank you, Shelley. Thank you, for the presentation. I do have a question. So you said that legislation, House Bill 56, was introduced in 2020. Did you try anything this year, 2021, and are you planning to try anything for 2022? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I'm so sorry. It was introduced in 2021. It was actually introduced first introduced in 2020 and then reintroduced in 2021. It did not, both times it flew through the House and was stalled in Senate Finance both times. I'm so sorry. So if you're looking for it, you wanna Google 2021 House Bill 56, and then that will pull up that legislation for you. I'm so sorry that I didn't say that correctly.
Oh, no, that's okay. So just for point of clarification, were you asking for money?
No, it was not enumerated at all.
Because, okay, so I'll get with you. So I'm a former state representative, and that's one of the issues I focused on, because I had part of the international district, and I had the central corridor, which there was a lot of prostitution and sex trafficking in my district. And that's dear. I mean, I love that district. Anyways, I'll get with you to maybe work together. In regards to, maybe asking about, there was a question in the chat about maybe the Foothills Community Policing Council could consider a recommendation asking the city to prioritize traffic manners for the Gateway Center. That's from Judy. Why don't we just do a meeting with the mayor and ask him to do that? And we could all go to, and Shelley and, whoever wants to join, we should just do it. I'm happy to arrange that. If everybody is okay, because that's huge.
It is. And I'm going to just jump in on a few things with that. So we have, worked with the committee who has been putting together that because of our concern for the young people on the streets, and essentially have been told time and time and time again that there's not young people on the street, and that's not the priority, that the Gateway project priority is adults, chronically homeless adults. And so just as an FYI, that's what we've heard time and time again. And so we've talked with Carol Pierce, we've talked with Doug Chaplin, we've talked a lot. I am happy to talk to the mayor. When he first came into office, that's when we first brought this issue up to him about the ties with our homeless youth population and trafficking and what was happening and what we see when we go on outreach every Friday night. Like, we literally with our own eyeballs can see that. And so if we can coordinate that and bring that back to his attention, I am so happy to do that. And maybe having it come from a different direction instead of just coming from some of the youth serving agencies it would be great. An interesting thing that actually happened today is that CYFD announced an RFP for a safe house for minors who are trafficked. So between, I think, up to 12 minors. And we have been working on this project with them for many years, for 3 years. And so we knew that this was coming, but the RFP was finally just announced today. And so that kind of gives us some hope about being able to have a safe house, which is when you're looking at a safe house, you're looking at like maybe 30, 60, 90 days, somewhere in there. And so that's kind of taking a step, in our opinion, in the right direction. And then of course, we're hoping to be able to have a more robust answer with the facility that we're looking at building as well.
Thank you. And my last question is, I'm in a lot of organizations, a lot of groups. I do have been talking with the DEA, and if the Foothills Community Policing Council allows me, I'd love to bring them and maybe connect you, Shelley, with them, because the cartels sometimes that are in our state are working very closely with the gangs. And yes, they do drugs, but then they do other stuff like sex trafficking, right?
Oh,
and,
yeah.
and this is one of the things I learned. I talked to the main director of the DA of our district, which we're in the district of El Paso. And they said, well, New Mexico is one of the only states that does not allow for federal agencies, and it's complicated, right? It's it's a complicated issue, that they don't allow communication between entities like police, sheriffs. So it's a federal mandate, I guess, and I really don't understand. But maybe we can work on something. I need to be more educated on it. But if that's the case, that's what DEA said. We need to change that, because then that's blocking your efforts. That's blocking even our community policing council efforts. And it's blocking DEA too, you know, APD, sheriffs. If the, well, I want to ask, that may I move forward to maybe schedule a meeting with the mayor, Mr. Chair?
Certainly, Idalia, and we will have an opportunity coming up in about 10 days, as you know, with an informal event that's scheduled. So there is that. Ms. Repp, could one of the things that I hear at the Criminal Justice Coordinating Council meetings is the difficulty of sharing information, and that's, I'm thinking that might be part of what Idalia's question is, that getting continuity of care from somebody who is being treated by through, let's say, a resource at the MDC to be referred to some outside civilian agency. Sharing of the personally identifiable information under the HIPAA rules is a real problem. Is that also a problem for you? And then a related question regards ID cards, that people without identification can't get identification. And that's been a real serious problem. So could I ask you to address those two things?
Sure. So the first thing with us, so law enforcement and addressing those issues is going to be very different than service providers. So I can't speak to how that works between DEA, APD, BCSO, any of those things. I don't know. But this is what I know for our agency, is that we use ROIs, release of information. And so essentially we're pretty quickly able to get ROIs set up with anybody, so that way we can talk with them. And so we that's kind of one of the first things that we do with any person that we're taking in as intake or screening for human trafficking or any of that. So we haven't had too much trouble, and it's generally not even delayed by more than a day or two because of that process. So we're pretty good as far as that goes. Now, when you look at trying to get IDs, that is a whole different ballgame. So getting IDs for adults is much simpler than getting IDs for kids. And so it's a lot more challenging to do that for our young people. And so with that, we really have to work closely with CYFD and a couple of other agencies to be able to get what we need to be able to do the IDs. For our agency, we work really hard so we call those all vital docs. Vital docs is a really big piece of what we do, because we work with these young homeless kids and trafficking victims, and almost always their ID is taken away from them by the trafficker or is held by the trafficker, and they don't have any ability to get that back. And so that's one of the things that we are up against all the time and are working on all the time. So there's not a simple process, but we just kind of keep it going.
That's a real problem. It would be one thing if we all had state issued IDs. That's one of the, that's traditionally one of the things
Jody's really good at getting boxes. That's what they said about me.
that's one of the things that we used to say was good about the United States, was that you didn't have to have identification to do anything anywhere. But now it's kind of a catch-22, isn't it? That young people don't have government issue ID. So if they lose whatever school ID they have nothing.
Yeah, that was my next question. Do New Mexico schools do school IDs? Or is that up to the school?
They do use school IDs. And so that's still something that we see in New Mexico. We work primarily with APS and, when we're looking at like kind of the school stuff, so APS and then the charter schools in Albuquerque. And so we're generally able to, if we're able to work with a kid and kind of find transcripts and all of that, we can kind of get access to a school ID. So sometimes we're successful within that. It's, again, because they're underage, it just adds kind of a level of complexity that is there for their own good, but it just makes it harder when they don't have parents that are able to respond, or they're not willing to work with CYFD, as Sergeant Bailey had mentioned before. When you've got a kid, excuse me, when you've got a kid who is on the run, or in this kind of situation, they do not feel comfortable in foster homes, and they end up being in these precarious situations because we don't have other good options for them. And so one of the things that we do, and so just putting that out there for you also, Sergeant Bailey, is our drop-in center is considered very low barrier. So we're located off of East Central. So basically the intersection of Zuni and Central, we're just north of that intersection on General Chenault. And at our drop-in center, they fill out a very minimal intake, just because we have to show something that somebody came. They can take showers, they can do their laundry, they can get food, hygiene. And when they're ready, then they can connect with one of our case managers to start the process with housing or with any of those things. The nice thing about the drop-in center is that if you've got a kid who's on the run and isn't really ready for services, but is kind of interested in getting help or getting off the streets, it's that kind of open door to start coming in and seeing how things work, connecting with other kids, connecting with, with people who are there to help them. And it costs $0, and they don't have to have an ID to do any of those things. And so it's one that we've seen some pretty good results with for those younger kids.
Ms. Repp, is a lot of the problem a legal one, that the kids cannot act as their own agent because they're under 18?
Yeah, so we have all of these like conflicting kinds of policies in the state of New Mexico, and honestly, feds. So kids at 14 can make their own medical decisions for themselves, but they can't decide to check themselves into a hotel or motel, but they can make decisions about whether they have an abortion or make decisions about any of their medical care. So we have things like that where kids are allowed to make certain decisions, but then they can't make other decisions. And so that's where you kind of get tricky, is you've got this kid who's allowed to decide some things, but can't decide all of their things. And that makes it hard. The other thing we have to realize is that the longer a kid is on the street, the more likely that they're going to fall into a really dangerous situation. But not only that, the more likely they're going to kind of embrace and become part of that street culture. That's not a great culture, when you're looking at rampant drug use and what you have to do to get your drugs, which is generally the property crimes that you're talking about, or, breaking and entering and those, kind of petty theft kinds of things. That's how these kids are supporting themselves so often, is stealing whatever it is and then selling it on the street so that they can buy whatever their drugs are. So if we look at this and we see these kinds of things, if we can, again, I know I keep preaching to the choir here, but if we can address that when they're 14 to 21 years old, then we're flipping the script, and then we're not addressing it when they're 30, 40, 50 years old as a chronic homeless person who has been addicted for half their life. But that's just me.
No, that's amazing. And we're very fortunate that Catherine Bolkovec, who is on our team, has international experience with.
And I unfortunately, I think we have to reach these kids before they're 14.
I agree. So here's some other things. Since I'm on my soapbox, we have tried for years to get into APS to be able to provide education around human trafficking. Because let me just tell you, especially when you look at that lover boy trafficking, it is a known pattern. It is something that the traffickers say the same things in the state of New Mexico that they say in California, that they say in Texas. Like, it's the same. There is this pattern, but we can't get in and get this kind of education. We did a webinar for the APS board elections for the whole state. We offered it to everybody who was running for a public school board, and said, we want to talk to you about these vulnerable populations. And we talked about physical and sexual abuse. We talked about the foster care system, and we talked about human trafficking, and how those issues are not being understood or educated within any of our public school environments. I have been able to speak to all sorts of charter schools about human trafficking and do education for their students at charter schools. I cannot get the door open to APS at all. And I think that that's a big thing, is those students do.
Shelley, sorry, I may have a solution for you. I have a website, but besides that, I'm partnering with a teacher in the state of New York, and she's creating a national curriculum for human trafficking for junior high on up. And so I will connect with you. Maybe Bob can send me your details. I'll put you in touch with her. And I think that once the standards are met, it's going to be a national curriculum, not just for the state of New York. So hopefully that'll be a way in. And I'll connect you with her after the meeting.
That'd be wonderful.
And Shelley, I think on that point that Catherine was making, I think that the best way to reach APS is through the APS board and present before them. Because it's, believe it or not, yes. I mean, Andrew Salazar was saying on the chat that we do need to put pressure on politicians, and we do, because it's definitely a huge issue that it's not talked about. I'm in an organization that prevents human trafficking, right? It's if you start to pay attention on who's walking the streets, and you pick up right away, even in the middle of the day, I did a ride along a few weeks ago, and you could see that this man had a young woman, and it looked wrong. I mean, it just looked wrong, but you can't just approach them. You can't just go up to the girl and say, hey, are you okay? You can't, right? There's just so much that we can do. But as I said before, I'm happy to connect you with the APS school board people. I just had one of them actually for dinner over at my house this last week. And
I need to come to your house for dinner too. Like,
everybody's invited. Party at Idalia's. I have everything here. So, and anyways, I'd be happy to connect you with APS. And then also, again, I want to, just for formality purpose, I do want to make a motion and make, on behalf of CPC, have a meeting with the mayor, and anybody that's wanting to join us, they can join us. But I do see your point, Shelley, that sometimes it does need to come from a third person or an outsider, because if it's the same people over and over, I get it. I've been there, you know. So with that, Mr. Chair, can I make a motion to go ahead and, you know, schedule a meeting with the mayor to discuss? And I know, Mr. Chair, you did say that we have a meet and greet next week, but that's a meet and greet. I think this deserves a sit down, serious conversation with serious commitments.
Well, I certainly have no objections. If it's a motion, it needs to have a second.
Can somebody second me, please?
I'll second it, but I think we should add to that resolution, take a look at it to add some educational and legislative thoughts to that resolution. That
Absolutely.
maybe take a little longer to write.
Oh, absolutely. And, you know, I'm sure we'll have our input, but also, you know, legislation from the, you know, what's being proposed in the 2022 legislative session. We'll have a full presentation that way we're all prepared. And it's not just CPC, it's Shelley. It's, you know, and there's two other organizations I'd like to introduce you to, Shelley, that you would be, I think you would enjoy meeting about human trafficking. So, okay, we'll plan on that.
Okay, I don't think it requires a resolution though, Idalia. Let's see what we can, see what you can instigate within our CPC and within your contacts and the rest of our contacts.
Okay.
We can't just go into a meeting with the mayor and say, hey, we want to talk about X, Y, and Z. We have to have a plan and a solid reason.
Right. It'll take, you know, this might be, you know, maybe at the beginning of next year, right? Because we need time to plan and organize. I agree.
Okay, Shelley, let's see if any of this has provoked some thoughts from Sergeant Bailey.
I was just going through the questions here. I only have one that seems to have popped up, and it was the, can we get a team of law enforcement officers to act as buyers to find the children? Yes, we can. It's not as simple as it sounds. It's actually manpower intensive and does take quite a bit of people to do it. Any operation you're looking at, something like that, on the buyer end of it, now setting up a John op, that's what we call the kind of the prostitution things we used to do is not as hard. But the buyers, we had probably 6 months ago set up an operation, and we ended up talking to 2 different people, probably for a total of 6 months, ultimately to have them flake out. So it's a whole lot of work and very little reward. Especially when you go into it blind, just, you know, pop into a chat room and do it blind. So yes, it's possible. It's not always feasible. We like to try to do that. It's a little bit more proactive. And we all had fun doing it, but it was not as beneficial as we would have hoped it would be. So.
Well, I've had, not in something as sensitive as drugs or sex, but I've had some experience being set up to buy ill-gotten gains, and it's you burn through manpower for pretty quickly because the buyers become known rather quickly. It's also very dangerous. You have to have a safe location for the buyer to operate.
And a lot in the buying and selling, a lot goes into it. You have to have, we have to have background set up. The people that are doing this, believe it or not, are very intelligent and they're very wary of getting caught. So even in the position I'm at, I have very limited computer expertise, and you know, I have a 17-year-old daughter that runs circles around me on the internet, and there's people that's actually what they do for a living, is buy and sell human beings on the internet. So they're very good at checking backstops and stuff. So it's just, it's a long process. It's not as easy as it sounds. And do you have
Shelley,
any other-
what about the people on the, you've talked about the supply end, and you've talked about the production end of sex trafficking. What about the purchasing end?
So I think demand is something that absolutely needs to be addressed. I think that we have this market because we have people who are willing to purchase kids for sex or purchase anybody for sex. And so when we look at that, we have to understand that demand is absolutely a huge piece of the equation. The way that we view it as service providers, again, service providers have a different lens than law enforcement, is that the guy who is picking up the girl or the child for sex, that he is just as guilty as the trafficker and should be picked up and charged. There's a model in that's used in the Chicagoland area, Cook County up there, where they have purchasers, so they don't have to be purchasing kids, but people who are purchasing sex, they get picked up, and basically it is an enumerated crime. And so they are charged for first offense, like $500. Second time they're picked up, you know, it escalates. And that money that comes in is actually then used to fund housing and programming for victims of sex trafficking. And so to me, that's like a pretty good model. We've seen some cities that do like shaming kinds of things where they'll have like billboards and, you know, these were the guys who were, you know, purchasing sex, things like that. There's a lot of different ways to look at curtailing demand, but I think that that's a part of the equation that has to happen on multiple areas. So not just law enforcement, but looking at something like, you'd look at something called a John School, which is kind of like an education aspect of you know, people who have purchased sex, and educating why this is dangerous and what it, you know, what it contributes to and those kinds of things. The other thing that I'm going to throw out there, which is always super controversial whenever I bring it up, but the biggest aspect in creating demand that we've seen in the United States is pornography, and the absolute ease for which pornography is accessed now through the internet. And so there's several sites and there's several studies that you can look at and show all of the ties between pornography and purchasing sex, and just, you know, the detrimental effect that it has. Now, here's the deal. Pornography, unless it's child pornography, is absolutely legal. And so when you have something like that, this is a legal thing that is contributing to a very illegal enterprise when you're looking at sex trafficking. And so I don't know how to address all of that, but you just want to put, you know, fire onto the fire, add fuel onto the fire. There we go, by throwing that in there as well.
Okay, I'm going to try to phrase the question to get at something possibly more sensitive. I'm going to just flat out assert that most of the Johns, most of those who are buying these services aren't underprivileged, poor people. There's people that look like me, and that live like I do, and that live up here in the Northeast Heights.
So there's a study that I've got, and I can find it to get the data on it, but it is when it kind of breaks down who's doing the buying, and within that, it is 85% of all buyers are white males. And then that 85% of white males kind of then divides into white collar, blue collar, no collar, you know, and so it kind of gets divided up within there. And then after that, the next highest percentage are Hispanic males. The next after that are African-American males. And after that, it's Asian males. And so the highest percentage by a huge amount are white males that are buying sex.
White males that have got
Disposable
lots of
income.
spare money.
Right.
So on my end of it, we don't really deal with the, again, on a regular basis with the purchasing of, you know, sexual activity. When I say buy a child, I'm actually talking about buying a child. That's what we tried to do. It wasn't, you know, attempting to entice somebody to have sexual relations with an underage person. As far as the child exploitation end of it, we're a little bit different, and this is just from experience. Again, the pornography thing that she touched on is very real. 100% of the people that consent to an interview with us, they had started out at the age of 12, 13 years old with a phone, and by the time they're 20, they're bored, and it just builds from there. And eventually by the time they're 25, I think that's kind of our average age, between 25 and 30 of people that are trying to entice kids on the internet or through texting. By the time they're 25 to 30, they've moved on to kids because that's the only thing that excites them now. And that's just the hard truth of it. I don't have any, you know, social degree or anything like that, or study that can put that out there. That's just what we see. But our end of it is every race. The unicorns in this business that we do are the women. Rarely do we get women that are trying to entice children in any way, shape, or form. It's kind of a weird thing, but for us, there's every economic rung on the ladder is touched. Again, with it primarily just being the age for us is generally between 25 and 30, and then there's a large leap. And it gets up towards 50 and over. But the pornography thing is the big thing that by leaps and bounds is probably the number one thing in America that is turning people into predators unknowingly, from our view.
Well,
Did I hear correctly, Sergeant Bailey, 25 to 30-year-olds are buyers? And then you skip a few years and
not so much buyers. 25 to 30 years old. Think of how she was, what did she call it? The lover boy approach that they use. That's the age group that we deal with. A lot of what we deal with is, especially this past year, like I said earlier, is kids that have been staying at home. They have no one to talk to. They have no one to hang out with. There's over 1,500 apps that you can put on your phone, whether it's talking through any kind of game that you play or just straight texting apps. And there's over 1,500 of them worldwide. And a very small percentage of them are run out of America, actually, that these kids have access to. And so that's where these predators for us are, as far as the child exploitation part of it. Now, the at-risk runaways that we deal with, that's kind of a different story. And I will be honest with you, they're so seldom here that we can actually get a good case on one where somebody will sit down and talk to us, that I'm sure Shelley has a very broader experience base with it than I do on that end of it.
So what kind of studies and what kind of social controls are we looking at for, cracking down on social media and parental controls on telephones for these kids? I mean, let's face it. I mean, internet technology is what's really caused this issue over the past 25, 30 years to be where we're at now. And it just seems like it's ever growing.
I have 4 kids, and phones are so prevalent now. I can't keep my kids locked out of a phone.
Right. I mean, yeah.
It's so it's something that's new, and I think that's the biggest problem is we don't it's so new that we don't know how to get a handle on it. You know, you can blame the parents, but you know, there's just as many kids that come from quote unquote good homes with good parents that fall victim to this. So I don't have an answer. I don't know. You know, I wish I did. I'd make money on it, but there's just, it's so new right now. I don't think we know the long-term effects that it's going to have. It's probably one of the greatest social experiments that's been run on humanity in a long time.
Actually, Sergeant, on that point, so one of the companies I'm looking into joining, they're recruiting me. It's an international company, and they do have, this company started here in New Mexico, and it's called Parental Controls. And what this business does is provide controls for children for the, you know, access to eliminate access of predators, you know, on iPads, computers, phones. And this is a company that just started. It's international.
Yeah.
And, you know, but anyways, I can share more about that if you're all interested. Just I'll put my information.
I believe I can't remember the name of the person I talked to that was involved in that. And that is good, but that is a choice that you have to put on your phone. It's not something that is broad to where we can make a sweeping change to whatever laws. It's actually something that you have to purchase and put on your phone. And then that's up to the parents. There's apps out there like that now that can do it, parental controls that can do that.
Yeah.
There's just no societal answer to technology right now. It's greatly outpacing our ability to keep up with it and keep our kids safe from it.
I'm going to jump into with that. So yeah, it is. I absolutely 100% agree with what Sergeant Bailey is saying. There are a couple of other kind of things to kind of throw in the mix. So one is that what we have seen with kids who've been trafficked, whether they, you know, are coming to us as kids or whether they're coming as adults, is that 95% of them have been sexually abused. And so when you're looking at the kids that are being trafficked, you know, average age of entry are considered the teen years. You're looking at kids that they could come from a great home, but they've perhaps had some really bad things happen to them. So they can come from that. But by and large, the kids that end up as trafficking victims are coming from our foster system. And so which means they are disconnected. They don't have that caring family like we would look like, that traditional family that we would think of. So they're disconnected. Their relationships with adults is a different kind of relationship than what we're used to. And so because of those kinds of issues and those kinds of disconnects, they are much more vulnerable. And so in looking at this and trying to address this, when you've got healthy relationship with your kids, and my guess is that Sergeant Bailey does, and you can talk to your kids about this kind of stuff and you can tell them these things and why they need to be careful and why they need to be responsible. Those kids, even if they do funky stuff on the phone, are far less likely to end up as trafficking victims or abuse victims because of that family of care that they come from. It's those kids that are really disconnected that are a lot more vulnerable. So that's one piece. The other aspect is that if you are looking at like parental controls, there's two that we've used and that we do recommend to parents as well. I don't think you ever surprise your kids about putting that on the phones. I think you talk to them about why you're doing it and how it works so that there's a good understanding within that. But that is, you know, that's out there as well. So just more info.
Okay, well, we're nearing the end of our I'm gotta say, very dynamic and terrible but useful webinar this evening. And I'm wondering if Commander Collins has any thoughts that he'd like to add, since he's on the ground here.
No, as far as this discussion, I mean, this is one thing that I do not have any expertise in. And that's why we rely on the information that we received tonight from Ms. Repp and from Sergeant Bailey. And if, you know, and Shane and I know each other fairly well. And, you know, he knows that if he needs anything from the Foothills, that I'm always a phone call away.
Okay, Sean, we hadn't heard from you this evening. Would you like to add any comments? You may have been abducted by aliens himself. Ms. Repp, thank you so very much. Sergeant Shane Bailey, thank you. This has truly been a worthwhile evening. It's very, very difficult, but very worthwhile. And before I hang up, I'll put, I'm not sure how to do it. I'll be happy to supply contact information for anybody that requests it. And you can get to me by through the Albuquerque website, and in the search thing, the search bar, put in Foothills Community Policing Council. And that'll take you right to the policing councils, and then all 6 of them are listed there, and you can get the contact information for the chairperson. So anyway, and I see Commander Collins is in there, and Sergeant Bailey, I don't remember yours off the top of my head, but maybe you could put it in the chat window quick in these last few minutes before Kelly Mensa starts saying it's time, gentlemen, time, and we have to close up shop. So anyway, thank you all very, very much. This was excellent. And at this point, I'll suggest that our next meeting is December 13th, and we have a couple of special items coming up in December, plus the semi-annual update from Chief Medina. But in addition to that, at least 2 special items. So stay tuned. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
So
Yeah, I'll
moved,
put the
Elijah.
motion. She beat me.
I'll second it. Go ahead, Graham. I'll second it.
Okay, a motion to adjourn. But I'd just like to say thank you to everybody. It's been really interesting and eye-opening.
Yeah.
Thank you all very much. Thank you, Shane Bailey. Thank you, and to all of the team members on the CPC. Thank you very much. Commander Collins, as always, we're in your debt. Thank you, sir. Good night.
Bye, everyone. Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you. Bye.